Hello and welcome to another edition of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. This month marks the 5th year of Shree hosting the New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parek. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host, and I'm proud to say I've been working with Shree for about 3 years on this program. And what a way to kick off our 5-year anniversary month. Andrew Rosenthal, former New York Times editorial page editor. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please like, please share, tell your friends, retweet, and most importantly, sit back and get ready for a great show. We'll go ahead and join Shree and take a look at what's going on the Upper West Side of New York City. Shree, looks like a beautiful day today. What are we looking at?
It really is beautiful here, Neil. Good morning. You can see downtown Manhattan on this side, and that's the skyline around Central Park South. And over here is Central Park in the distance. And down here you see Sunday mornings have always been quiet in New York, but never this quiet. And that's because of the pandemic and everything that's going on. And over here you see the Hudson River. And somewhere over there is Montclair, New Jersey, where our guest is joining us from. We have a fabulous guest today. Andy Rosenthal is going to be here, the former opinion editor of the New York Times. And he is going to share his thoughts on the news. What a news week and news day on which to bring on Andy to talk about the New York Times and all that's going on in the world. Patricia is watching and says, "Hi, New York Times Read Along team. Tell us where you are. Tell us about your Sunday and tell us what's going on, folks. We'd love to hear from you." And Doug is watching from California. That's incredible. He's awake at 5:30 in the morning. Thank you so much, Doug. He once was a guest on this show, waking up early for us as a guest.
Absolutely. And I want to give a quick shout out to my mom watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. She's saying hi to the New York Times family, our New York Times Read Along community. Shree, you've built up such a great community over the last several years, and just thrilled to be a part of it. Checking in, by my count, the 1, 2, 3, the fourth person to check in today, Jonathan Borstein. Hello from the East Village, Jonathan.
Right there, I see him. Do you see him right there?
Right there.
He has watched almost every episode of the Read Along, but he has also watched every single episode of my daily COVID show, 207 episodes. It's been an incredible run. Jonathan's watched every episode. I'm so grateful to him. And everyone, we have a show tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern instead of 9 p.m. Eastern. And that's because starting at 9 p.m., this guy, Neil Parek, and I are going to be helping run World Teachers Day for Education International, and live 24-hour stream starting at 9 p.m. Eastern and ending at 9 p.m. Eastern on Monday. So 9 p.m. to 9 p.m. starting Sunday night. We're going to have incredible speakers from around the world in multiple languages. And I am the grandson and son of teachers. And as a professor myself, I can't think of a better reason to stay up for 24 hours than World Teachers Day. So that's at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight. And therefore, we are doing our daily show at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight. We have a great guest. Ruth Ratlott is here with us. She is a tireless advocate for people with different abilities and also works to get underserved youth into college. And we call it positivity because with every rotten thing going on in the world, we like to have one day a week when we try to be generally upbeat. And we don't always succeed, but it's great to have Ruth with us tonight.
Great, Shree. Thank you. Let's go back and check out some of our other guests that are joining us before we talk about our great production team. Mark Oppenheim joining us from Wantagh, New Jersey. We had a great jobs workshop on Friday that Digimentors put on. Thank you, Mark, for such a great job with that. Linda Bernstein, Patricia Kitchen, Sneha, a great team of people came together to put that on. So thank you, Mark.
Hi, Mark, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please keep telling everyone about this episode, especially 5 years of the read along, Neil. I just can't believe it.
Yeah. Diane is tuning in from South Jersey, and Pradnya. Did you ever imagine, Shri, how important these shows would become to our audiences, how much of a community this would become? So there's the first question, Shri. I'm going to start the interview with you. Did you ever, like when we go back, when we look at that first episode, you set up your camera at home right there on the table and said, we're going to play with this new thing called Facebook Live. And I love the New York Times. So let's see what that does. Did you have any idea that this is what we would come to 5 years later?
No, because Facebook Live was new then. And this was, such an early time for this kind of technology. And we also didn't know where newspapers would be. So if you had told me what I'm about to show you would be the situation then, this array of news articles and newsprint and magazines would still be this strong all these years later, and that the New York Times would continue to invest in journalism the way it has. And you couldn't have also predicted that Donald Trump would be president, that a sitting president would call journalists the enemy of the people, things like that. And so much unpredictable. So many things have happened that no one could have predicted in these 5 years. It's
absolutely. And again, the number of guests we've had, the various issues we've tackled, and going to the printing press, the home of the New York Times print editor, Tom Jolly. And then, when we got to start using StreamYard last December, we're closing in a couple of months, it'll be a year. Talk about increasing the production level of the show and getting sponsors and having a full production team. I can only imagine what the next 5 years might bring us, Shri.
And we should tell everyone who may have missed this along the way that because of the read along, we've been able to hire Neil at Digimentors as our VP of Events and Communications. Basically, he runs all our events, including our shows, starting with this one. This will always be a special part of everything we've built together, Neil. So congrats on your work, taking something that was just fun and making it something extra special. We have thousands of people who watch every single day, every single week. And then now to have Andy here as our guest today, so special. So yeah. I can't wait to get to Andy and hear his thoughts. We should tell everyone, if you throw up the card on the screen, I will tell folks that you're seeing two journalists on the screen with the card, the promo card for today. But only one of us was born in India, in New Delhi, India. I was born in Tokyo, but Andy Rosenthal was born in New Delhi, and we'll hear that story in a bit, I'm sure.
Absolutely. What I'd like to do is take care of a few quick things before we jump into the paper. The most important thing, and I appreciate the shout out, Shri, and the opportunity to work with Digimentors full time. This certainly grew from a passion project into the foundation of everything we do. But go ahead.
Before that, I just want to point out that you have a special connection to the New York Times. Well, to journalism in general. You're a reporter yourself. You also got to work with your dad, who was the publisher of an Indian newspaper in New York, and you have a very special connection through him to the print Sunday New York Times. I'd like you to tell that story since you've told it before.
Sure. Thank you, Shri, and with my mom watching as well. So we grew up reading the New York Times, and certainly as always, getting the little blue bag in front of our house every day, the special connection, among other connections, October 1st. So this is going back just a few days this week. is it's been 11 years since my dad passed away. One of his last wishes when he was cremated was to be cremated with the Sunday paper that day, which was incredible, and it's always been a poignant moment, and just shows the deep connection that we have, that our family has to the paper. So every Sunday, I mean, this is a ritual. Being with the paper, reading the paper, producing the show. It all comes full circle. So thank you, Sheree, for that.
I get goosebumps thinking of that every time we get to talk about it here, that your dad asked. He was such a fan of the print New York Times, the Sunday New York Times, that he asked to be cremated with it. What a story. And I feel like even if there was nobody listening, for us to do this as a tribute to your dad on the anniversary, especially thinking of him, and to your mom, who's been a loyal viewer and big supporter of this show. I'm just so lucky that we have you all in our lives. So thank you very much. And big greetings to your wonderful family in Virginia, both your wife and daughter, who have been very special part of our lives here. So great to talk to all of you.
And Sujana is saying hi to my mom. Of course, Sujana and I, our families have known each other for years. It was great. She's of course the host, one of the hosts of She's on Call, which airs at 11 o'clock on Sundays. But what was interesting is when I told my mom that we were doing this new show, she said, "You actually know Sujana. What are you talking about?" And I didn't realize that we actually knew each other when we were little, and I knew her father. So here's the information for today's show, Sri.
At 11 a.m. Eastern, this show will run, where you'll get to learn from Dr. Sujana and Dr. Marina. They're marking Breast Cancer Month and Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and they have two radiologists on. So 11 a.m. Eastern, everybody, please join us. I get to be in Neil's chair as executive producer with Sujana and Marina, and we do this great show every single Sunday. So please join us for that.
And I'd also like to just thank Patricia for her comments on paying it forward and leaving a legacy. That's certainly what it's certainly important. So what I'd like to do before we jump in, Sri, and what I was trying to say earlier in terms of joining Digimentors and the work that we've been able to do together, we couldn't do the New York Times read along without a full production team that brings us together. In addition to Sri and myself, Paula Kiger, she's at Big Green Pen. Steve Taylor is at Steve DeReeve. Julia Weeks, you can follow her at Julia L. Weeks. And Carla Baranakis, who has been an incredible part of our New York Times Read Along family and is responsible for some of our biggest guests over the last several months, including putting us in touch with Andy Rosenthal. So Carla, thank you so much. We certainly couldn't do this show without a full team behind us. And I don't want anyone to think just because they're not on camera that they're not essential to our success. So thank you to our production team. We also want to thank our sponsors, Sri. So let's go ahead and do that before looking at the paper. Mukhrak, you've done some great work with them, right?
They are amazing. Mukhrak has now launched Mukhrak Academy, Fundamentals of Social Media, a free on-demand certification course that more than 4,000 people have attended, and we'd love for you to take it as well. I learned so much putting this together. It's about 2 hours of work. You can do it in 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months. Please sign up. We'd love to have you.
Great. And in addition to Mukhrak, we also want to thank Strategy Focus Group. In addition, Mukhrak and Strategy Focus Group are both sponsors of the New York Times Read Along. Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. Thank you to Mukhrak and Strategy Focus Group for your support, specifically Greg Gallant and Mike Schneider from Mukhrak and Ron Thomas a previous guest and a frequent viewer of the show, wherever he happens to be, usually in Dubai, but he's a loyal watcher. So thank you, Ron. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Shri or myself. You can reach us at shri@digimentors.group or neil@digimentors.group. And we'd want you to learn a little bit more about our sponsors as well. You can follow these links, readalong.link/Mukhrak or readalong.link/strategy focused group to learn more about the great work that they do. So with that, Shri, let's go ahead and jump into the paper and give us a sense of what's in the paper today before we bring on our guest. And this will give people a chance to make sure they share on Facebook, retweet on Twitter, mention your friends in the comments. You can mention them to make sure they see it. And if you happen to be watching on Facebook or on Twitter, you just happen to come across the feed, make sure you press play on the video so that you actually watch the video instead of just watching the post. So we'd love to have you in the comments. So go ahead. What's in the paper today, Shri?
Sure. We're looking at the cover of the book review, Spies Like Us. There's a special opinion section, which we'll want to ask Andy about. It's called The Amazon Has Seen Our Future. Just talking about the forest, not the company. Metropolitan Life Reclaimed at the Speed of a Bike. And this is about Seb Modak, who was a guest on the Read Along this year when they launched the 52 places to go for 2020. He and Amy Vershup hosted Neil at Amy's home in the Bronx, and they did a live New York Times read along. That was an epic episode, and I know many people saw that. And so now he's writing about, after traveling the world, what's it like to travel by bike in New York. And the Times magazine cover is about the attack on voting, how the false claims of voter fraud are being used by Republicans to disenfranchise Americans. Such an important story. There's the Times magazine called T, which is the style magazine. The cover of Sunday Business is "And Then There Were None." This is about the only Black CEO of a top-tier bank, and now he has also left that position. So what happens? And the Sunday Review, which used to be one of the many parts of Andy's job at the New York Times, reality pierces the bubble. And the day the White House woke up. There's also Arts and Leisure, and I know that Andy has a lot to say about cinema and coverage and arts coverage, so that'll be interesting to hear from him on that as well. And I'm just going to look at the Saturday paper and then bring in Andy so that he can get us started. Here is the Saturday cover of the New York Times. President in hospital as he battles COVID. Experimental treatment given. Stay to last for a few days. Now there's no spinning away pandemic's toll, is one of the lines here on Alexander Burns' story. All right, so let's bring Andy in so he can say hello to us, as the cover of Sunday is "Confusion and Concern as President Ails." And you're seeing that. Hi, Andy.
Hi,
Hey, Andy.
Andy. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at the president's sickness. I'm laughing at the decorous headline. The Times is always so delicate.
Great.
So,
Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Andy, for being here. We'll just talk a little bit about the paper, and then we'll catch up with you. Tell
Sure.
me, as you're looking at the paper here, what strikes you apart from the headline, the array of newspapers and print sections. It's, if you had, would you have predicted that the paper would still be in the shape that it's in now?
I guess I sort of did in my most optimistic. I worried, the Times was, on the brink of bankruptcy 3 or 4 times in its history and always came back from it. And primarily because it is supported by a family that continues to invest in the paper when times are tough. We made some decisions that people thought were really stupid, like charging for the website. There were people who predicted we'd go bankrupt in 6 months. I guess they were wrong. And it has persevered, and I'm really proud of it. I think that the internet is the most amazing printing press ever created, but the one that prints on paper still has things that we've never been able to duplicate digitally.
And you did a lot of inventive things when you were running the opinion section, and
I tried.
We'll talk about large parts of it when we get to the opinion section. But why don't we catch up with you? Tell us, you have deep connections to the New York Times and your own journey. So I teased this out before that only one of us was born in India. So let's start there if we can.
Yeah, sure. I was born, I always say that my first job at the New York Times began at around 7:30 in the morning, New Delhi time, on February 25th, 1956, which is when I was born at Sita Sen's nursing home. My father was stationed in India, and we left there when I was 2, and then proceeded to live in Vienna, Warsaw, Geneva, and Tokyo. All before I was around 7.5 when we returned to the United States. And I had only been in the United States very briefly, like for a week or so, twice before that in my life. And it was quite a culture shock when we moved back here. But then I grew up in New York City and spent most of my youth pretending that I was not going to be a journalist. Which I learned later was somehow preordained by somebody. I'm not sure. Maybe my dad. And I went to college, and I had a terrible college experience, but I ended up going to work for the Associated Press during a year. I took off, and I discovered journalism, and it just was like the third day I was at the AP. I was hired there as a news assistant, and it was like a bolt of lightning had come down from the sky, and said to me, "This is your future." And I started working when I was in college, and as a sports reporter for the AP briefly, and I stuck with it, and was with the AP and the New York Times for 40 years.
And what was that day like when you discovered that journalism was for you? What was the epiphany you had?
Well, I was literally sitting in the AP newsroom at Rockefeller Plaza at the time, and I realized that I had known the answer to the previous 3 questions that had been asked by editors before they finished the question. And I looked around and I thought, God, I just feel right here. It was odd, and it was a little bit terrifying because going into a business in which my father was such a gigantic figure struck me as foolish in the extreme. But I managed to survive it.
Well, we should tell everyone about your dad.
Oh, right, my dad. Yeah, my father was Abe Rosenthal, known in the journalism world as A.M. Rosenthal. Which allegedly stood for Abraham Michael Rosenthal, but my father made up a middle name once, which is a funny story. And he worked for the New York Times from the time that he was also in college until shortly before he died. And he was the executive editor of the Times and changed newspapers in a profound way. He and Punch Sulzberger, who was the publisher at the time, Arthur Sulzberger, and they created the multiple section newspaper in the 1970s when newspapers were about to die. And it was an extraordinary moment. And he was
Sorry, I was going to say that why were newspapers going to die in the 70s? Everyone associates it with the internet in the 90s. So if you can just mention that for a quick moment.
2 things. Labor costs, labor unions were flexing their muscles, especially in New York. There was a powerful printers union in New York, and they were causing trouble for newspapers. And the cost of newsprint was climbing, and television was interfering. And New York went from, I believe, at its peak, had 7, I believe, morning dailies, and now has 2. well, the Post, I guess, is a newspaper, but it also used to be an afternoon paper. I've always thought of it as an afternoon paper. And the Times, as my father used to say, was one newsprint price increase away from facing bankruptcy. And they had one of those, oh my God, what are we going to do about this conversations? And they came up with this idea of splitting the newspaper up into thematic sections on a daily basis. Sunday had sections previously, but the daily newspaper was just basically one continuous section in two parts. And they made a deal where the newsroom, i.e. my dad, traded, Walter Matson was also I can't remember who the president of the company was, but they did one thing for the circulation and advertising department and then one thing for the newsroom. So they did the home section for circulation and advertising, and they did the science section for the newsroom. And that science section was the first one of any newspaper in the United States, I believe. The science editor of the New York Times, Manny Friedman, was the first science editor of a daily newspaper.
Wow. And now look at all these sections in the New York Times. Even now, sections matter because they are ways to entice and keep the customers they already have. And also, they're also advertising vehicles, right? That's part of why you want sections, is so that you can focus ad revenue and advertiser interest.
That's correct. There are geographical issues for advertisers, which basically involves the A section. And then there are sort of more territorial issues like home and style and travel. And then there were places where nobody wanted to advertise, like the Week in Review, which was a wonderful section. But because of big changes in journalism, it started to lose its purpose. And we turned it into a kind of a hybrid opinion and analysis section under my watch. And suddenly we discovered that people actually wanted to advertise there. Much to our chagrin, the back page of the Sunday Review became popular. Today there's no ad there, but there often is.
And what was it like to go from the news desk to the editorial side? Well, how did you decide to make that jump? And what did you gain and what did you lose personally as a journalist, as a person, being able to make that move?
Well, it was a transformative experience, Sri. It happened in 2003, and it was not something I intended to do. It never occurred to me to be an opinion journalist, and the idea that I would someday be editorial page editor of the New York Times was extremely unlikely. For one thing, I didn't shop at Brooks Brothers, which appeared to be a requirement for that job. And I just never thought about it. In 2003, the New York Times had a huge upheaval. The executive editor and the managing editor were fired. And there was a huge turnaround. Bill Keller became, Joe Lelyveld and then Bill Keller, and the whole management was shaken up. I was the managing editor for news at the time, which was a job I had actually gotten on December 11th, 2001, which is a great day to start that kind of a job. And I didn't know what was going to happen to me. Everything was up in the air. The deputy editorial page editor was sent down to become the Washington bureau chief, and I got a call from the editorial page editor, Gail Collins, whom I admired but did not know. And we met, and she asked me if I wanted to be deputy editorial page editor, to which I replied, "What do you do?" And we had because I didn't, I read editorials, but as a reporter, especially a political reporter, I kind of stayed away from them. I didn't want my brain to be polluted or something. I think that's silly now, and I called my wife, and my wife said, "When do you start?" That was her response, because she felt I needed a change. And I said to her, "Do you think I have enough opinions to be editorial page editor?" And that was in 2003. And if my wife were here, she's away this weekend with a friend, you could still hear, she's still laughing about that. Do I have enough opinions? It turned out I had a lot, and it was a transformative experience. I gave up the newsroom, which was, that was hard to let go of. I'd really grown up in newsrooms at the AP and at the New York Times. I'd literally grown up in the Times newsroom in some ways. And the power of the newsroom was extraordinary. I had been the foreign editor, the Washington editor. I was national editor for a while. And it just felt like a time to do something different. And it's a strange thing when you move from the newsroom to the opinion side at the Times. It's almost like going to a different organization. You know, you're separated by 7 floors, where you were in the old building, and by this invisible wall that existed between the opinion section and the newsroom, for very good reasons. And it was also, as it turned out, much nicer. I had an incredible office as deputy editor. And then when I became editor, I had an amazing office. It was like I had a 2-room suite with a private bathroom with wood panel. Those were the days. But I discovered something, which was that the power of journalism to change, to crusade, to advocate, and to work for causes and to actually affect change is really something that's very personal when you're doing opinion, especially the editorial page. And I just loved it. I had no clue how to write an editorial. My first one I just stumbled into, but I learned. And I was in the editorial department for 10 years, and in many ways, the best 10 years of my career. Really extraordinary time.
That's amazing to hear this. By the way,
Yeah.
a couple of references. One, you mentioned Brooks Brothers, and you wouldn't have predicted that Brooks Brothers in 2020 would file for bankruptcy.
Well, there is that, yeah.
Yeah, and 2003 would have been one of the most important years at the Times because of the run-up and the war in Iraq. So can you talk about that?
The war in Iraq. We made a big mistake. Journalism in general, the New York Times specifically, in the war in Iraq. And it's funny because it's sort of relevant now. And we just weren't skeptical enough. You know, we'd had this experience in Afghanistan. Everybody was in favor of the war in Afghanistan, even though we knew it was going to go nowhere. But, you know, it was after 9/11. Everybody was all patriotic. And Iraq just seemed kind of weird, you know, but the government was making this case that there was a national security interest in dealing with the problem of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which I personally, having looked into those when I helped a friend with a book about Saddam Hussein, didn't believe existed. But I tend not to believe in, not that I don't believe a lot of the stuff about super duper weaponry, but it often turns out to be a word I can't use here, nonsense. And I also knew it, but the case was powerful and it was going to happen. And we assigned reporters to, it's funny how immediately I'm going to the question of the causes of the war. Did Judy Miller start it? It's so funny. But that's what people talk about. So we assigned the best reporter in Washington, one of the 2 best reporters in Washington, a man named Michael Gordon. The other best reporter in Washington was a man named Robert Pear, to find out what was in the national intelligence estimate that the Bush administration was going to send up to Congress to justify voting for a war. And they found out, and we reported it. The question we never really asked was, is the government lying to us? Is this intelligence estimate just a lie? And we weren't accustomed to doing that, which is kind of funny since the whole history of the war in Vietnam was a lie, and the New York Times had revealed that during the Pentagon Papers. But we never pursued it. And I also think that the Times in particular, and journalism, American journalism in general, hello from the Upper East Side, didn't pay enough attention to the anti-war movement. We just didn't. We didn't give it the credibility it deserved, and we didn't listen to its arguments well enough. And we ended up with a kind of a one-sided coverage of the run-up to the war that I think was deeply unfortunate.
And what do you think? Did anyone pay the price for that, apart from the U.S. military, the millions of Iraqis, the whole upheaval in that part of the world? Was anyone held accountable?
Who was responsible for that war?
Well, the war, the coverage, all of this.
Nobody was held accountable for anything after the Bush administration. I think, you know, I'm a huge admirer of Barack Obama. He's one of the few people who ran for president in my lifetime, and I started voting in presidential campaigns in '76. That I voted for with great enthusiasm. The rest of the time I voted against the other guy. But he decided that he wasn't going to look back at the Bush administration and hold them accountable for what they did. And as a result, nobody was held accountable. The people in the government who fostered that war, who were responsible for the torture, who were responsible for the wiretapping, none of them were held accountable except some very low-level ones. There was a bit of upheaval in journalism, a bit. Certain journalists were pilloried. I mentioned Judith Miller before, who was a Times journalist who many people blame for the war. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but some of her reporting turned out to be pretty questionable. And we had a lot of internal soul searching about it. If we came up with some kind of a useful new journalistic rule to prevent it from happening again, I'm not sure what it is. Other than to pay attention, and I know I personally, as an editor, did not pay attention to the anti-war movement, which is bizarre since I grew up in one, the Vietnam anti-war movement.
And here we are now in a completely different era. It's almost 20 years since those days. So just walk us through the rest of your story. So how long were you there? You went from deputy to running the editorial section. Talk about that, please.
Right. I was the deputy for a while. It was in many ways the best job in American journalism because you got all the fun and none of the hassle. And Gail Collins was the best boss I ever had. Sorry to all the others, but she was extraordinary. She was my writing mentor. She encouraged me. My first editorial was about the awarding of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the National Book Foundation to Stephen King, which I thought was kind of funny. And Gail said, "Why don't you write about that?" And I said, "Well, what position should I take? Is it good or bad?" And she said, "I don't care, just make it funny." So I wrote like 300 words, which wasn't terribly funny, but she made it funnier. And then she decided after a few years that I was ready to be editorial page editor and that she was ready not to be editorial page editor. And she and Arthur Sulzberger took me out to dinner, allegedly to celebrate her 5th anniversary as editorial page editor. And there was nobody else there, and we were in a private room in a restaurant, which I thought was a little odd. And the dinner began, and Gail said, "Do you mind if I do this?" And Arthur said, "No, go right ahead." And Gail said, "I'd like to toast the editorial page of the New York Times." And they both raised their glasses to me. And that's how I became editorial page editor. She went back to her column, and I loved it. I used to say that the most important job in American journalism is the one that Dean Baquet has, which is the executive editor of the New York Times. Although Marty Barron at the Washington Post is now equal, I should give him his due. That's an incredible newspaper. But the most fun is the editorial page of the New York Times. And the best thing about it was I only had one boss, the publisher. The worst thing about it was I only had one boss, not because it was the publisher, but if you only have one boss, you can't play mommy against daddy. You're kind of stuck with one boss. But I was totally independent, and I discovered early on that I could do whatever I wanted. And the resources were pretty meager. Our budget was about 5% of the newsroom budget, something like that. But and it was very hard to get money. But I decided to just start doing stuff, and because there was nobody to tell me not to except Arthur Sulzberger, and he was very encouraging of change. So we started a video series called OpDocs, which became a kind of iconic new form of op-ed. We started the Sunday Review. We started international coverage that we'd never done before. We had about 35 people around the world who wrote for us. OpDocs. I have 2 Emmys and a Peabody Award in my house here, which is pretty good for an ink-stained wretch like me. And we started doing all kinds of things online. We did a big series about transgender rights, and we invited our readers to tell us their story, either because they were transgender or they knew someone who was, or they were involved in it. And we thought we'd get 10 or so. And we created a wonderful way for people to upload it. It was really easy. And within about 2 days, we had so much that we had to add 3 people to just review all the video the presentations we were getting, and people just flooded us. It never occurred to us that a print newspaper could become a place that people saw as a destination for video. We also did podcasting and all the other kinds of things, and started all kinds of online stuff. We had now this is going to date me, but we had Roseanne Cash, Suzanne Vega, and Elvis Costello. And if you're old enough to know who they are, 3 great musicians who wrote a song together by emailing MP3 files back and forth to each other, and they did it all on a New York Times group blog about writing music.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it just goes on and on. And since I've gone, they've expanded even more and more and more and more and more and more. I'm not, don't pretend that I did it all, but we were online fast, and heavy. And because I'm a computer nerd, I got my first email address in 1987. And it was a wonderful and amazing job. And I left in 2016. I wrote a column for the Times for about 2 years, but then I decided that it was just, and I published a book for the Times, a compilation of political coverage from Abraham Lincoln to Donald Trump, called the New York Times Book of Politics.
We have the cover right there.
There it is.
Yeah.
Maureen Dowd wrote a foreword for me that was just brilliant, of course, because she's Maureen Dowd. And my wife, Mary Beth, who used to be a lobbyist and knows more about politics than I do or ever will learn, helped me put it together. And it was a real labor of love. I started out thinking only an idiot would try to put together 167 years of political coverage. But the Times asked me to do it, so what the hell, right? And it turned out to be just an absolutely extraordinary experience. And by the way, people at home, you can view every single page of the New York Times going back to its very first edition online. It's called Times Machine, and it's free, and it's extraordinary.
One of the many things about the Times that people may not know is about the Times Machine. So thanks for that reminder. And then finish out your tenure at the Times.
Well, as I say, I was the editorial page editor for about 7 years. We did all that stuff. Some of the stuff that I was the most proud of, I guess, we did a series of articles advocating for the federal legalization of marijuana, which kind of blew everyone's mind that we would do it. Pardon the expression, blew everyone's mind. And but our argument was primarily social justice. The drug laws in this country, and particularly the marijuana laws, were created to imprison young Black people, and we could debate that for the rest of time, but you'll never change my mind about it. The effect was definitely imprisonment of young Black people. I think that was also the intent. And it had a huge, and then we ran this gun control editorial that you're about to show. This was our first front page editorial since 1920. It was right after a massacre in San Bernardino. And the publisher called me at home on a Saturday early. I was in bed. And he said, "What are we going to do about San Bernardino?" And I said, "We'll write an editorial." And he said, "We should go crazy." And I said, "Great, we will." And he and I were big crusaders for gun rights. I mean, gun rights, the rights of people not to be killed by guns, otherwise known as gun control. And he was always very supportive of it. And then he called me back about 20 minutes later and said, "What do you think if we put it on the front page?" And I said, "Well, that's nuts. And, but what does Dean think?" And Dean Baquet being the executive editor, since he owns the front page. Well, Arthur does, but you know. Anyway, so Dean came back and said, "Go right ahead." And so we did it. And it was scary. And a lot of people hated it. The guy who, Eric Erickson, who runs a right-wing website, put a photograph of the front page of the Times on his website with a series of 9mm bullet holes in it, which in a gentler age would have been considered a death threat, but in 2016 it wasn't. The sad thing was the guy couldn't shoot. His pattern was terrible. The bullet pattern. But it was extraordinary. And the interesting thing, Sri, just quickly about the the marijuana editorials, and also we did a series of editorials on transgender rights, and that series of editorials had an immediate and discernible impact. After we ran the editorial on the military, which was lagging behind on this issue, and a very moving video about two transgender people in the military who were getting married and had to be secret about who they really were. The Secretary of Defense changed the policy on transgender rights in the military and had his office call us and tell him he did it because of the editorial and the video. And it was, you know, you get very few of those moments in journalism, but there it was. But the thing I was going to mention was that every time someone wrote about it, either online or in print or talked about it on television, they showed a photograph of the front page or the editorial page or the front of the Week in Review. Because what's really powerful is that printed newspaper. Yeah, there it is, The Quest for Transgender Equality. That's a young transgender man who wanted to know why we're using his picture, because he had transformed himself into the most privileged person in society, a white cis male, a seeming male. And the other photograph we had was of a transgender woman, and he said she was had transformed herself into the most oppressed person in society, which is a black transgender woman. And that really opened my eyes, Sri. I mean, I knew a lot about this issue, but reporting it, working on it, and talking to people, it really changed the way I think about just a gigantic number of issues. And
you must be so proud, Andy, of what you were able to do with that story and that issue, changing people's lives.
Yeah. I am very proud. You know, I think one of my proudest moments too as a journalist was editing our special section in Nation Challenge. That was kind of the primary editor on that we had after 9/11, and that was another moment too. And it's a moment when you feel like you're actually touching people's lives in a way that matters. You know, and obviously, if you're an opinion journalist, it's the way you think is right and they're advocating for, but has impact, you know, and that people feel it. And when you work in an like I worked at the Associated Press and then at the New York Times, and they don't really exist in the same space-time continuum as ordinary people. They just don't, you know. And you miss that when you work at that level, or you work at network news or sort of that level. You know, your ability to touch people's lives, you know, in a way that matters to them, not to you, but to them. And it's extraordinary.
I wanted, since you mentioned both Marty Barron and Dean Baquet, I wanted to show everyone this picture that I got to take 2 years ago. And I said, rare and important photos of the editors of the, we said these are all enemies of the people. And I stuck myself in there with that photo. And it was fun. This was in Pittsburgh at a national conference on the First Amendment. And so there's that moment that I got to experience talking to both of them about where we are as a country, as in journalism and all of that. And last night was the Saja Awards. And I want to remind you, Andy, we met when you came to Saja and spoke about your dad and about your work in the opinion pages. And so last night, Dean was one of our guests, and my team, Neil and I and Vandana, did the production for the show. And look at how American journalism has changed. If we can reflect on this for a moment, that bottom row of the head of CNN Digital in so many ways, and the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, the executive editor of the New York Times, and a top NewsHour journalist. This is not the journalism world that you went into in most of your career.
Thank God for that. Radhika Jones, by the way, is brilliant. I tried to hire her once. And a word about Marty Barron, who I think is an amazing editor and who does an extraordinary job playing Liev Schreiber off the screen, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Liev Schreiber played him in the movie and had him down pat. You know, Marty and I worked together a lot when he was at the Times, and he can be really irritating, but all really good editors are really irritating. I'm sure I am too. But he went to the Washington Post, he went to the Boston Globe, and he inaugurated their coverage of the Catholic Church and the raping of small children. And he then went to the Washington Post, where he's shown, and then Jeff Bezos, who, whatever else his many flaws are, I don't know the man, is the best thing that's happened to American journalism in a generation, I think. Gave him a huge amount of money, and Marty has taken it and has breathed a new life back into the Washington Post, and they are, in the immortal words of my dad, kicking ass all over the country.
They really are, and Marty is terrific. If you haven't seen Ray Donovan, which is the Liev Schreiber series on Showtime, that's another side of Liev Schreiber that Marty may not want to be associated with. But
I'm not associating with Ray Donovan, but I remember when he came on the screen. I looked at the screen. I was sitting there with my wife in the theater, and I said, after like 30 seconds, I said, "Oh my God, it's Marty! It's just Marty!" And there was this young couple next to me who looked like they were in their 20s, and the guy leans over to me and said to me, and I speak Russian, so I could tell he had a Russian accent. He said, "Were these real people?" I said, "Were these real people?" And I said, "You bet. All this happened." And he couldn't believe it. So it was great journalist.
Yeah, Marty's terrific, and glad to hear that. All right, let's get to the paper.
Okay.
We have only
What we're
about
here
45
for, right?
minutes left, and we've got to read all of this. We've only made it, I think, to the front, to the top of the front page. Tell us about this story. What you think of how it's been covered so far, and I don't know if there's been any overnight developments. I've not had a chance to check.
What we have is a kind of an uneasy feeling that the president is sicker than he's letting on, or that the White House is letting on, which sadly, given our times, was the first conclusion everybody reached, that we can't believe anything that's said by this administration, and that there were two theories. One, that he was sicker than anyone believed, and the other was he didn't have COVID at all and it was all a fraud. And obviously I'm very worried. I think the Times is doing its best to provide its usual blanket coverage. The problem is that we have two pieces of information. The president has COVID and his name is Donald. And that's basically it. The rest is what we're being fed. That extraordinary thing where the chief of staff was telling people on background that he was actually sicker, and then he got outed for it and then had to say it on the record. And Tom Friedman once said to Barack Obama in my presence that he had the worst PR organization of any White House he'd ever covered. I think Tom would agree that this one makes the Obama one look like it's the best one in history. These people, in addition to the constant lying, are just incompetent. And so we have a situation where the president is clearly gravely ill with a disease that has killed millions of people of his age. And we don't really know what's going on. The coverage has been okay, given that. There's too much of it. You could argue that there's, do we really need 9 stories, all of them saying more or less the same thing? But I'm not going to criticize that, because when I was there too, the urge is to print as much as you possibly can, to provide as much information as you can.
And here it is: nation stays divided even over Trump's illness. Some extend empathy, others cite karma. And one of the points you just made, people talk about this White House. Is it dishonest or incompetent? Could it be both?
The answer is yes. It is both dishonest and incompetent. I think that their management of the government is terrible, even when you factor in the idea that these are all people who believe there shouldn't be a government, basically, which is kind of ridiculous. But they also have absolutely no idea what they're doing. People were appointed either for their ideological credentials or their sycophantic friendships with Donald Trump. And if you read the sidebar that's on here, we have different editions because I live out in the burbs. But in West Wing, Fear of the Boss, Not the Virus was originally up at the top by Annie Carney and Maggie Haberman. And basically it says that everybody in the White House exposed themselves to COVID because they were terrified of the president ridiculing them. Which
he would say, get that thing off in meetings. If you wore one to a meeting with him, he would say, get that off.
That's correct. He is a man who is a combination of extraordinary ego. People say he's a narcissist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I use that term. and who is completely amoral, and who I think never bothered learning anything except how to get one over on other people. He has an extraordinary ability to tell you what he thinks you want to hear, and he often knows what it is that you want to hear. And he has basically crippled the White House. No, Carla, I have not read Mary Trump's book. I decided not to read Mary Trump's book because it's about a person who was born in the 1950s into the family of a narcissistic sociopath and what it did to his personality. And since that describes me, I just didn't want to read it. So I'm not reading it. And also, by the way, you know, the explanation for why Donald Trump is the way he is a kind of minor concern to me. I think a lot of people grew up in a lot of terrible circumstances and overcame it. And by the way, anybody who grew up wealthy in the family of a jackass does not get to claim that he was turned into a horrible person by it. I'm sorry. People grow up starving to death in the desert, and I'm just not interested in why Donald Trump is the way he is. What I'm interested in is how to get him out of there. Sorry, am I being too?
No, we appreciate your passion and kind of the analysis is so important. I would say that the one point you made about he likes saying what you want to hear is exactly how he was manipulated by Kim Jong-un, wasn't he? While writing him love letters, he then was able to continue building up his nuclear program. And I know that the editorial page is very clear on its stance on the issues around nuclear proliferation. And here is a president acting against America's interests because people manipulate him as much as he manipulates other people.
He acts against America's interests in almost every foreign policy arena that he is involved in, including, by the way, in the Middle East, because it is not in America's interest to foster the fantasy that the Israeli government can keep the Palestinian people under permanent military occupation and subjugation until the end of time. And I think that he is swayed by that. I think American leaders in general, having spent 4 years in the Soviet Union as a journalist in the 80s and studied Russian and Russian history, American leaders in general are absolutely witless and clueless about the Kremlin and about the Forbidden City in Beijing. And they don't understand how those people work. And that when when you go to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and you tell them you think they're wonderful and that you don't want to talk about these icky human rights things because you want to talk about trade and other important stuff, and you know, nuclear weapons are really great and we all have them and it makes us real men. They don't think you're a nice guy. They think you're a moron. And they think you're a chump. And I don't understand why Trump fell for this, because he thinks the same thing about all of his supporters too. He thinks they're chumps. I'm certain of it. So why he fell for this with them is beyond me. It's also beyond me how this so-called heir of Ronald Reagan could be sucking up to the Kremlin at this point. And the only question in my mind is not if he's a tool of the Kremlin, is whether he is a voluntary and cooperative tool, or whether he's just stupid and manipulable. I'm sorry, am I not being clear about what I think?
No, we like it when you're clear. And
the thing about Russia is really disturbing, Sri.
Yeah,
I mean, he basically has said to the former KGB guy, the heir to Stalin, that they can go ahead and do whatever the hell they want in any country they want to, including American allies, by the way.
Yeah,
and those would be Afghanistan and Ukraine. And
you lived in the you lived in the Soviet Union in the mid 80s, early 80s, yeah. You said, and I lived there as a kid, and I got the full communist treatment in the 70s, so I know how much they're able to manipulate and control. And I was a little kid, and I could experience that and feel it. And then, of course, having read about everything, you're saying that he's given them permission. Well, oh yeah, let's talk about this photo.
All right, that photo, which, you know, I can't blame anybody. I sent it to you. You have to guess, Sri, which one is me. That photo was taken Christmas 1962 in Tokyo, Japan. That is our dining room and our home. And our dining room table was on the floor. In Japanese custom, the floor was made of tatami straw mats, and there was a pit where you could sit in little kind of, stadium chairs you put down the floor to sit in for Westerners so they would be comfortable. And there was a little charcoal brazier in the bottom for the winters. And on the wall behind there is a Davy. It's a statue my father had purchased on the shelf behind you that my father had purchased in India, and he bought it. It was clay, and it was dying, so my mother had it bronzed. And my oldest brother now has it in his home. And that's me. Which one am I?
The one in the middle.
No, everyone says that. The one in the middle is my brother Dan, who he and I were virtually twins at the time. We still look alike, except I'm younger and better looking than he is. And the one on the left with the sullen look on his face is my brother John. And there we are. I'm trying to eat the chopsticks. My brother Dan just looks baffled, and my brother John looks pissed off. And that's me at the age of 6.
Wow.
Yeah. in our kimonos. It was probably Christmas morning. And the sign, which you can't really read, says Happy Christmas, which I thought was how you said it until I was 8 years old.
And you came here, and then
yeah.
And
that is me in my first job as the child of the New York Times New Delhi correspondent. With my mother, Anne Marie Burke Rosenthal, who was absolutely radiant and gorgeous, and who went from living in an Irish tenement in New York, being a secretary at the Times, to marrying this weird, skinny, gawky reporter. And then in 1954, she went to India with my brothers. I wasn't born yet. It took her 3 days to get there. When she arrived, she discovered that she had a household staff of 17 and 57 of their relatives living on our property that she had to supervise. And it was her second trip outside the United States in her entire life. And she was an amazing woman who was the bedrock in our family just through all of the craziness of traveling around the world. And every time my father moved, he would go first, and he would be the famous reporter on the scene. And then my mother would show up later with the entire household.
Yeah, first of all, wonderful photo, and so lucky you have that. And my mom, as the wife of a diplomat, that's the reason we traveled. It's really the spouse who does the heavy lifting of keeping the family together and safe and making everything possible for the diplomat or the foreign correspondent to do what they have to do. I'm just curious, the second time you said that was the start of your job, because was it because you were used as a kind of prop in dinner parties and things like that as part of the entertainment?
Yeah, we were part of the entertainment starting when I was about 10, I guess. My brothers and I were expected to put on our jackets and our white shirts and our blazers and our ties and go out to my parents' parties and introduce ourselves to all the guests and make conversation and then leave. And I found myself one day in conversation with Arthur Miller and Billy Graham in my father's library on Central Park West when I was 12 years old. And I'm sure I was enthralling them with my wit. But I met many of the great figures of literature and journalism and art in that period of time and in politics. And my brother once told the mayor of New York was Lindsey Graham. John Lindsay was there. I'm sorry, didn't mean to mention Lindsey Graham. And he was talking about something that was in the park, like on 99th Street or something like that. He said to my brother, "Have you ever been there?" And my brother said, "No, we're not allowed above 96th Street. It's too dangerous in New York." And he was the mayor at the time, so we got our own back, I guess. And then, it was just in my blood. My father's sister worked at the Times for 45 years. She had a different last name and people really didn't know who she was, but she worked in the arts and leisure section, which was my favorite section. And she could get tickets to anything. And we saw everything. I saw Jimi Hendrix when I was in 7th grade.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Therese says, great mom homage. Sounds like you were raised by an incredible woman.
I was raised by an incredible woman. You know, she was a flawed human being like the rest of us, but she understood what unconditional love was, and sometimes there were conditions. But she lived. She came from nowhere. You know, her mother had a 5th grade education. Her father had a 3rd grade education. She went to a secretarial school. She grew up in poverty. But she was determined, you know, and she saw something in this weird, gawky guy named Abe. My father was in the first UN bureau of the New York Times when it was started at Lake Success on Long Island. And the bureau chief had a secretary, and her name was Ann Burke. And my mother was that secretary. And she met my father in the office. And they met, they fell in love, they got married. Once in secret and once in front of their family. In secret because they were married by a Catholic priest, and my father didn't want his Jewish family to know that. And they were together for a very long time. They ultimately got divorced.
And were you raised Catholic, or?
I was baptized by my mom. All my brothers and I were baptized. I was baptized at the Cathedral of New Delhi. And we went to church on Easter with my mother. There was a period of time when her biological father, her parents were also divorced. And my step-grandfather really was my grandfather. But this is somebody I came to know late in his life. And he was a very interesting and very strange man. And he went to church every day. And I would go with him occasionally. And we celebrated Christmas, and we went to my Aunt Rose's house in Queens on Cherry something Boulevard or something for Passover, and they would come to our house for Easter.
That's a busy weekend.
Yeah. Well, Passover and Easter are really the same holiday. We just don't admit it, right?
Right.
But it was interesting. You know, my mother died 6 years ago, I guess. And she was an amazing woman. She worked at Carnegie Hall for like 30 years doing their calendar and volunteering there. She has a seat in Carnegie Hall with her name on it now, which they gave her, which we were all very proud of. And she once did public service announcements for WMCA radio. Do you remember that?
Wow. That is...
Yeah.
What an extraordinary woman. Have you ever got to sit in that chair?
Of
at Carnegie Hall?
Oh yeah. No, I got to sit behind it.
Yeah, behind it, right. That's where you can see the name. For people who don't know, you can kind of have a chair named in tribute, and then the idea to sit behind it so you could see her name.
Yeah, when they did it, they invited us all to some event. I can't remember what it was, and they seated us around the chair. And then afterward, the staff of Carnegie Hall stayed on, and they had a whole ceremony for my mom in Carnegie Hall.
And we're thinking of Carnegie Hall and all those other cultural institutions kind of turned completely upside down by the...
Oh my God, what a tragedy. And they were all hanging on by their fingernails. You know, the Metropolitan Opera, which admittedly, you know, caters to about 0.0001% of the world, but is an extraordinary thing. Was, you know, making a bit of a comeback, at least in terms of audience, under Peter Gelb, and now where are they? You know,
and they canceled their entire season instead of saying we'll come back in January or whenever. I think they're being more realistic. Yeah.
Well, will they ever come back? You know, and these are things. You know, there was a thing we used to say at the New York Times that the reason you can't get rid of the New York Times was if we didn't have a New York Times, nobody would invent one. In other words, it's too big to create now. And, you know, in the Metropolitan Opera, you know, which survives off of donations and, you know, kind of a highly rarefied thing, it would be a shame, you know. It's part of the city's cultural history. The renovation of Lincoln Center completely transformed the Upper West Side, completely. You know, where Lincoln Center exists now is where West Side Story as a reality took place. It's where it was filmed. It was tenements, you know. Anyway, let's not get nostalgic for the old New York.
Andy, it's 9:40 and we've not made it past the front page. This is...
Oh my God.
But this just tells you what a great conversation we're having, and people are
Well, we
really
were talking
interested.
about Trump.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that, you know, you look at the Times, it's sort of a meta thought, right? And the only thing that really matters today is whether the president of the United States is going to live, right? But look at what the Times is doing, okay? The home section is at home. They're trying really hard, you know. It's about COVID, yeah, okay, but fine. It's also got it's got other stuff in it that's just amazing. You know, 5 dishes to cook this week. The Times has become terrific about giving food. You know, the Times really pioneered food coverage, but Craig Claiborne and the other food critics wrote about restaurants you could never go to. And, you know, now they write things that, you know, recipes you can make in 20 minutes at home while you're yelling at your husband about the kids' online school. The arts and leisure section is a great piece about Latinos in American cinema, which is a terrible history. It needs to be read by, and they have actually managed to find 20 films for the past 2 years, and probably how many of them have you seen? I mean, seriously. And, you know, here you can look at this and you can feel like, okay, you know, I think I'm a pretty liberal person. I think I'm a cultured person. I couldn't name 20 movies about Latinos. And I'm ashamed to say I probably have only seen about 4 of them, right? And it's got nothing to do with COVID. It's got nothing to do with anything except that the New York Times is always recognized, and the genius of the paper is that the most important things are the most important things. But some of the others are really important too. And architecture, design, style, recipes, marriages, all of these things matter to people, and they're all worthy of coverage that doesn't treat people like idiots, that challenges their minds, that kind of raises their sensibilities, that shows them things they didn't see before. It can be a little bit predictable. You know, there's been a lot about the trials and tribulations of having too much money and being at home. And today we're learning that Deepak Chopra has suggestions for how to live our lives, which blows my mind because I've never heard from him before on that one. But, you know, and there's things, you know, like I wish they wouldn't do. You know, I wish they wouldn't talk about, look to the left of that, you know, rich women and whether they're drinking or not. You know, I just don't care. And I think that, you know, I think newspapers, the challenge right now for newspapers in general, and I'm actually working with a local newspaper, the Montclair Local. Let me plug it for a second. This was started by a hedge fund guy who moved out to Montclair and realized that the local newspaper was terrible, and he took a whole bunch of his own money and he started a local, and it's nonprofit now, and we're trying to survive. And the thing we're trying to do is create something that the people of the town can see their lives in, and not just the rich people who live in my part of town, but everybody, the young people, the people of color, the middle class are being driven out of town by the taxes, you know. And I think that what is that? Is that the Montclair Local? Yay! And you can be a member. It's a nonprofit. And we're exploring nonprofit journalism, which is a new thing for me too. And I think, well, all journalism is nonprofit, but intentionally nonprofit. Not that we can't make a profit. We're not aiming to make one. But I think that, you know, and what you sometimes see and you sometimes don't is efforts to really get at, it's really hard for a big time newspaper that's in New York and covers the entire planet. And the New York Times does care about the little people. You wouldn't know what was happening in Sudan. You wouldn't know what was happening in other parts of the world if not for the New York Times, and, you know, and for reporters who get out there and cover this stuff. But I think in general, you know, looking at the people in this world who are ignored, who are oppressed, and who feel shut out is the lesson that I hope people are getting from COVID and from Black Lives Matter and from everything else. And I think the challenge for journalism right now is really big. The magazine is awesome too, by the way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Sorry,
And doesn't Jake live in Montclair
Jake
also?
Lives,
like everyone else?
Jake lives right over there. You can't see me, but I'm pointing to the general direction of Jake's house. There are somewhere around 125 New York Times families living in the two zip codes that comprise Montclair. And one of them is Jake Silverstein, who took what has been a sort of up and down rusty old thing and turned it into a really extraordinary new magazine. And he's won tons of awards, which are great things, which I'm sure we could list. But the other thing that he has done, which really impresses the hell out of me, is that he has, and you mentioned this in the way that those people looked on your on the Saja page.
Yeah.
He has changed the face of the New York Times Sunday magazine. When I think I can tell you this story. When he was still there, he and I were trying to do a couple of hires together. We were trying to get, ultimately he got one of them, which I'm very happy about. But we were trying to get Ta-Nehisi Coates to join the New York Times. He's one of the best writers and one of the best intellectual thinkers in America today. And he had written for us, on an ad hoc basis. And he said, you know what? And we told him we were trying to open up the page to new faces. And he said, you know what? Why don't you hire a couple of black people and then we'll come back and talk. And Jake did it. And it wasn't just about quotas, and it wasn't just about, but he has diversified the face of the Sunday Times Magazine incredibly. They're younger, they're diverse in every way. And I think that's awesome. And
it really is. And it's,
yeah. And look, he's a white guy,
So-
he is, so am I, but one of the things we're really useful for right now is helping other white people change the way they deal with the world. And I think we have a challenge of language in journalism, which is something I'm trying to write about right now.
Tell us what you mean.
Anyway, racism permeates our language. And I'm not talking about the language of racism. I'm not talking about words that I will not use. I am talking about the way racism is embedded in our language, starting with the word white, which is a completely false construction that was created solely and entirely for the purpose of creating a master class so that they could enslave a lower class, which they call black. It has no scientific meaning. It has no cultural meaning. It has no ethnic meaning. It's got no religious meaning. I taught a class, a graduate class, I'll brag, at Harvard a couple of years ago about race, politics, and the media. And on the first day, I assigned the students, I broke them up into groups and asked them to define white, African-American, Latino, and Asian. And these were serious graduate students, many of them in their 30s, and they couldn't do it because they don't mean anything. And we use these terms a lot now. We use terms like racial division. Racial division, is this cable or broadcast? The racial division is BS. Racial unrest. The New York Times once recently referred to Watts as the national symbol of racial unrest. No, it is the national symbol of racism, bigotry, police brutality, drugs, poverty, and segregation. The people in Watts were not out in the street simply because their skin has more melanin than mine. And the reaction to the phrase Black Lives Matter, people are, well, all lives matter. Yeah, right. Well, I'm sorry, that's not in question. I once wrote a funny post because I discovered that there was such a thing called the National Association for Men. And it was to protect men's rights. And I wrote this funny thing about how I didn't know our rights needed protecting. But I'm glad there was somebody out there making sure that white men don't get discriminated against. And I think we really need to focus on this. We need to change the way we use words. We need to change the way we describe things. We need to stop. Here's a phrase for you that needs to be obliterated from journalism. The name of the Washington National Football League team, which I'm not going to say, is a racist obscenity. That's not a question of opinion. It's a fact. The issue is whether or not it's appropriate for a professional sports team to have that as its name. But if you look at the articles, they'll say the Washington blanks, comma, a name that many Native Americans find offensive. Why do we have to put it on the Native Americans, a term, by the way, which is racist in itself, to say what's offensive and not offensive? Why does it always have to be on them? Why some Indian Americans find offensive? Why some we should be sensitive to it. We shouldn't have to make them the ones who come back and tell us it's offensive. Sorry, I went on a tear.
No, that's such an important point. You were saying even Native, you find the word Native Americans offensive also?
Yeah, it wasn't America. It's ridiculous. We're always saying stuff like native Colorado, native, Utahns. It wasn't Utah. These are names that were imposed by European invaders on places that were already occupied. And I think we need another term: native peoples, native indigenous nations. The problem with nations is it's kind of loaded politically because the government of Washington assigned the word nations to describe the reservations for the purpose of absolving Washington of any responsibility for them, not to give them real nationhood. I think we need a new term, and I think that the people themselves should come up with it. And I think it's time for us to cede control of the language. I think people who don't like the phrase defund the police, I get it. I understand why you think it's politically and tactically not a good idea, but I think we should just shut up and let people have their own language. Because we being me, the people look like me, we've been deciding stuff for too long. It's time to cede power. And remember Ms. Remember the resistance to Ms.? And Ms. is now part of our language. I have been learning to use the multiple personal pronoun because a member of my family does not want to be identified by a gendered pronoun.
Andy, just listening to you and just watching you, you're...
Oh, here we go. First Peoples.
Yeah,
Yes.
First Peoples, the terms like
good.
that. Yeah.
Yep,
I was just going to say, Andy, just listening to you and watching you and following your career, you've obviously understood and you're much more open-minded than most people. How do you get to convert the people who are kind of on the fence? A lot of people a lot of men born in the 50s are not like you. But they're the ones who have a lot of the power, 50s and 60s. How do we get them to be persuaded about what you're saying, or are they automatically turned off by some of the things you're saying?
I think some of them are, and I think the way I'm saying it is not always the best way. And I think that we have to start talking about it frankly and honestly and openly. And I think we have to start, people is good. Someone suggested, how about people?
Yeah.
We have to start with ourselves, and we have to be honest about what racism is. And we have to understand that we were raised with it. And that as a New Yorker, when I was growing up, I was conditioned to cross the street when I saw if I was 16 years old and I saw a young black man of my age, especially, or a group of them approaching me, I would avoid them. And that is a racist response. Does it make me a racist for life? No. And also this idea that intentions are matter. Yes, they do. But on the other hand, not nobody, but normal people don't get up in the morning and decide they're going to murder children. But some people get up and they are distracted and they pass a school bus and they hit a group of children and now they're child killers. The fact that they didn't set out in the morning to kill children is irrelevant to the rest of their lives. And I personally think that the racism in this country is deliberate, much of it. But what we need to do as people who care is start talking about the racism that we think is inevitable and passive and just kind of exists. Like Trump said, do I think there's institutional racism in the United States? Yeah, well, it's everywhere. Well, people are tired of that response. And people are tired of that response leading to the police killing with impunity. And I know they kill white people too, but that's not our concern here. And I know that when my son walks down the street wearing a hoodie, you're surprised. Someone says he's surprised I was raised that way. I'm not sure what he means.
No, about crossing the street.
You were raised that way too, Norman. I got news for you. I don't know where you live in your world, but I live in this beautiful little town that has one of the few historically voluntarily integrated public school systems in the country, and it's riddled with racism. inadvertent, unconscious racism. The reason I crossed the street to get away from those kids was because when I was in 7th and 8th grade, every third day when I was walking to school, a young black man approached me and relieved me of what I used to refer to as my mugger dollar, which was a dollar I kept in my pants pocket so I could turn it over to somebody who accosted me on the street. And I can say, thank you, Paula. I can say that it didn't come from my parents, really. I mean, they were liberal people for the most part. And yeah, there's racism everywhere. And I'm not saying this to say we should all, collapse in shame. I'm saying, let's talk about it. Yes, Norman, so was I, but we're not doing enough of it. And maybe you are. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. But fighting racism that's the way to put it. It's not enough to not be racist anymore. You have to fight it. And so thank you for saying that. And I'm really glad you were. But you also grew up in a country where the first African-American president may have been the last, at least in my lifetime. And his administration was marked by the rise of open racism in the United States. And that's what we're dealing with now. Now, the way to get to the people who may be on the other side but are persuadable is to get rid of the leaders who are forcing us to hate each other. And that starts with Trump. But it doesn't end with Trump.
You're convinced that America is in deeper trouble than it is now if he's reelected?
I think if Donald Trump is reelected, the United States is in for a real bad time. I think our civil liberties are in danger. I think that the country is no longer an aspirational place. Well, it shouldn't be for immigrants. I mean, they might want to come here, but they ain't gonna, unless they're from a country that is not from some religion that Donald Trump doesn't like today. If we don't stop what's going on in the state legislatures and in Congress and in the Supreme Court, our daughters and their granddaughters will not be able to purchase birth control reliably. Because the goal of the anti-abortion movement is not just to eliminate abortion, it's to eliminate birth control. And because it is birth, and the subsidiary effect of birth control is that it allows women to participate in the labor force, which the most sort of religiously conservative members of our society don't really like anyway. And the country is now a pariah, and it will be even worse. Donald Trump, without having to worry about re-election, he's already made, what, $2.5 billion or something off the presidency? I'm sure he'll double that in his second one. I'm really worried about what happens in this country. And I think flipping the Senate is equally important, because the Senate has been turned into an instrument of autocracy. And once we get rid of Trump, we also get rid of Bill Barr, who is a criminal, in my view, or at least commits criminal acts. We'll get rid of, all of them. Mike Pence. I'm really worried. I want my children to raise their children, if they have them, in the world that we thought we were getting when Barack Obama was elected, not the world that we have now.
It's so profound, Andy. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I'm telling folks is that everyone has to vote. And in my community, the South Asian community, there's a divide that people misunderstand what's happening in India, and therefore they think the voting here. What they don't understand is that this president doesn't want any immigration from India. He wants Norwegian fishermen rather than Indian engineers. And the Norwegian fishermen don't want to come here. They have a great life compared to being in this country. And he is actively will, I believe, suspend it's suspended now as an excuse because of the H-1B program is suspended because of COVID, but that'll become permanent. Stephen Miller is the worst. I mean, if you can think of someone worse than Donald Trump, it is Stephen Miller. And thinking
Bill
about
Barr
that,
and Mike Pence.
Yeah, I mean, you add them all together. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're partnering with our friends at Impact, an organization that is trying to get South Asians to vote. And there's a summit that is coming up next Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. I'd like to invite everybody to it. You don't have to be South Asian, but just look at that. The fact that there are those first four people are all congressmen and women in Congress today. Indians had a congressman in 1956. The first Asian American was actually an Indian American, was Dilip Singh Sound. And then there wasn't another one till Bobby Jindal, 40 years later.
Right.
And now there are four. And on the right is Vanita Gupta, an incredibly important civil rights leader today. She was in the DOJ as a top civil rights official. These are just the way America has changed. And I'm so proud that our community has changed, but we still need to get to folks who were born in India and are here. You were born in India. I was not. And that's a fun fact for people who missed it earlier today.
But I have a U.S. citizenship. India and the United States should be siblings. We share so much. We share a language. We share all kinds of things, and we share a love of democracy. We share a nasty religious divide. And yet it's insane, Sri. I totally agree with you. And it's not just because I was born there and because I love India, but it's because the countries have so much in common. And also, we're destroying the refugee program will cease to exist if Donald Trump is elected. You will not be able to be a refugee in the United States unless you are rich. And it's just appalling. This country is not an amalgam of Northern and Northeastern European descendancy. This country was built by Asians who built the railroads and who built the entrepreneurial things in our societies. The Vietnamese came to Denver when I was living there, and they moved out of the ghetto in a half a generation and transformed a terribly rundown industrial section of Denver into a beautiful space with some of the best Vietnamese restaurants in America. And yet we find ourselves increasingly at odds with Asia. I mean, what is going on? We're friends with the Kremlin, but not with New Delhi. I mean, how is that? I mean, look, the president of India is not my guy. Look, I'll give you that. Let's forget about India, but how crazy is that? Okay, enough from me.
Therese saying, go to 866rvote.org to find out about voting laws in your state. Make a plan to vote.
Yes.
Therese is an incredible supporter of the show, and she's talked a lot about the work that they've done at Justice Aid and also supporting 866rvote. Our voting rights are in deep trouble, and that's what the cover of the Times Magazine is.
Yes.
This week. We didn't even get a chance to go into it. We only have a few minutes left. I thought it is important that since we have you here, we look at the Sunday Review, one of your legacies at the paper. Tell us what, as I flip through it, just talk.
So the Sunday Review was turned into a sort of it used to be the Weekend Review, what happened last week. It kind of lost its way. We turned it into this. Heavy emphasis on cover, on art on the cover, of attractiveness, of themes. You've got a great piece in here about, and this is an interesting thing, Farhad Manjoo, who's terrific, who writes about tech for the Times. Really, really excellent. And he writes a thing here about Trump and masks. And this is really important to know. On the other hand, it doesn't matter. It has no impact on anything. Trump is an unbelievable liar. We all know it. They voted for him anyway. But it's really useful stuff. It's very attractive. Frank Bruni, who was a columnist I created, I'm very happy to say, writes beautifully about society and morality and does it here. A very nice look at the way that the coronavirus is having a disparate impact on minorities and oppressed groups in our society. Not a new thought, but one that we have to keep hammering at because it really matters. Okay. And this is going to be another thing. The aftermath of coronavirus is going to heavily impact the brown and black populations of our country more heavily than the white, and we have to stay focused on it, and the Times has a responsibility. I think Maureen Dowd, who was a bridesmaid at my wedding, she wanted to be best man, but my brothers objected to my current wife, is one of the best writers journalism has ever had, and I know she's controversial. But this is just, she's an amazing ability to talk about sort of, this is what's really going on, folks. And it just goes on like that, you know. The one about coronavirus, divorce, you know, I'd rather see something about the toxic alien thing. The Times always has rooms for crazy stories about nutty stuff. This is about some murderous weed that is destroying Russia.
And why is that
then,
in the opinion section rather than in the news
well,
section?
because the Week in Review, the Week in Review was a territorial dispute. There was money and print pages associated with it, and those things are worth a lot. And so I made a deal with Bill Keller that we would devote part of the Sunday Review to analytical pieces from members of the newsroom, so, and from people outside. And you'll see this is labeled as opinion. I don't know why it's labeled as opinion. I don't know why that big Amazon section is labeled as opinion. The word opinion is something that's worth an entire day of talking about. I like what they've done with the editorial page. We started opening it up a little bit, making it less gray. My successors have done even more of that. It looks really nice. They've also reduced the number of editorials they write, which I will tell you honestly, I think is a gigantic mistake, but it's not my page anymore.
Well, you mean because they're going for in-depth rather than normally? I remember in the old days, there used to be like 3 editorials every day, right?
Well, we also went in-depth a lot. They're going for pretty pictures and for design. And I think they're missing stuff. And I also think that a long editorial works if you can read it to the end. And if you only get through 600 words of it, then you fucked up. Oops, I'm sorry. You messed up. Nicholas Kristof, amazing columnist. Ross Douthat, a columnist I also had a hand in hiring. He was a blogger. I disagree with almost everything he says. And then some more stuff on the back. You know, there's a piece in here where somebody is arguing, not that we should get rid of abortion rights, but that this may be a fact, and what do we do about that? And then another wonderfully optimistic piece about how the NRA is going to die. We're going to run, I would say, probably 7,000 or 8,000 of those before the NRA dies. But the NRA exists to promote the manufacturing of firearms, and that's a very profitable business in our country. You know, there are more guns than people in America.
No, I didn't know that. No.
Yes, and the number of firearms in the country has been increasing constantly and rapidly, while the number of gun-owning households has been decreasing. Think about that. Sunday Business. Do we want to talk about that for a second? Great section. I love Sunday Business. I know my brother, who retired at the age of 48, always said that I am the most risk-averse and least financially knowledgeable person he ever met. So I love Sunday Business because it's for people like me who are really interested in business, who want to understand it. And this piece here, which just reports the simple fact that there are no black CEOs at any of the top-tier banks, and then takes a look at why and what brought him down personally and institutionally. That's a great story, you know? And think about that man's face staring at you from the front of the New York Times Sunday Business section. Now, I realize he lost his job. Okay, fine. But so it's negative, I suppose. But look at the images. The guy at the bottom, right?
Jalen Rose.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of really interesting stuff. You know, it doesn't, you know, it's, in some ways, it's like, you know, I always say that, you know, this is a terrible thing to say, but there's a certain kind of Upper West Side, Upper East Side liberal who reads a Nick Kristof column and checks off the box, worked to save humanity, you know? And there's also a kind of a business reader who reads Sunday Business and checks off the box, read the business section. And that's me. Because it's, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Let's go. Okay, Arts and Leisure brought me into the Times. That's how I got interested in the Times.
Before we go, Andy, I just wanted to ask you. There was a Brent Staples piece in the paper this week. Did you? I don't know if you caught it. He interviewed an Upper West Side liberal who is going to vote for Trump again, and explained why we should pay attention to people like that. He listed every crime that he's accused of, actual crimes, and then just crimes against morality and things like that. And she just had an answer. And he said, we as liberals need to pay attention to people like that who are going to vote for Trump. They're like the secret Trump voter. Do you think that's going to be, first of all, do you agree with that entire premise? And do you think that's going to be a factor? Like the opposite of the Bradley effect, right? Where the Tom Bradley effect, as you know, was that people would say they're going to vote for a black man because it made them sound good. And now people say they're not going to vote for Trump because that makes them sound good. They like lying to pollsters.
We know that people lie anonymously, which is fascinating. You know, they will lie to pollsters. I think the hidden Trump voter is a real problem. I disagree completely with the characterization of that person as a liberal in any way. You know, I don't want to argue with people about why they voted for Trump in 2016, but if you vote for him now, you're voting for racism, sexism, authoritarianism, white nationalism, jingoism. If you're voting for all of it, you're just voting for it. And you can justify it any way you want. I don't believe that there are undecided voters, and I don't believe that there are necessarily swayable ones. I think the real question in this election is who gets their vote out more and in the most important places. And by the way, if you know anybody under the age of 20, between 18 and 25, force them to register and watch them vote because they're terrible. And, you know, if I hear one more, you know, millennial tell me how much he likes Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden's too old. I said this before. I started voting for president in 1976. I did not vote enthusiastically for a presidential candidate until 2008, when Barack Obama was running. In every other election, I voted against the other person primarily. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the system. And I'm sorry that there's no more inspiration out there for you kids, but do you know that between 72 and 76, when the voting age was dropped to 18 instead of 21, there was a less of a turnout among young people than there was in 72. And it's your country. You're probably, none of you are listening right now, but your parents are. Vote and vote against Trump.
So just to be clear, I didn't know that. So when they reduced the voting age, hoping more young people will vote, even though they had the ability to vote, overall the number of young people who voted went down.
Correct. Well, the
so
number went up, but the percentage went down.
Right.
And even factoring in the extra 3 years. And I understand why. I get it. None of these people are listening to you. At their best, they're horrible versions of your parents, but they affect your lives. And if you are a 19-year-old woman in this country and you want to be able to decide when you're going to have children in your life, you need to vote in November.
It's very clear. Well, Andy, thank you so much. I wish we had more time. We'd normally get through much more of the paper, but today it's great. I'm so grateful, and this is our 5th anniversary episode. We're going to do a month of guests that we are selecting specially for the show, and we are honored that we're starting off with you and to hear your direct commentary, unvarnished, very important to me especially, and to our team and to our viewers. And we had some great comments. I hope we can show them to you, of people just being so grateful to you for offering them. We had a quote from Italy, and Pradney said you have to come back as a regular.
I'd be happy to. I love doing this, and I would love to talk to anybody who wants. Don't try to reach me on Twitter, but you can find me on Facebook. And I think this issue of language, you know, I'm sorry. I know it's really awkward when your child says, "I went out with them," and you don't know how many there were. Too bad. Get over it. Seriously, it's not that big of a deal. What you need to do is look at your child and ask them, "Tell me why you want me to do this, and let's work on it together." Because they're sending you a message. They're telling you something important about themselves.
Pradney has a story. talking about how her 5-year-old totally shocked a salesperson at our local fabric store by referring to his lovey as non-binary. I'll admit I was both dismayed at her reaction and delighted that my child has internalized the concept.
I think it is amazing. Both of my children reject this. One of them I call they. In other people say, well, what do you say to her? I say, hello, Natasha. I don't refer to my children in the third person when I'm talking to them. It's actually really easy. Just do it. You know, you can actually put on your phone, you can tell your phone that every time you type the word he or she to change it to they, and your phone will do it for you.
Before you go, the painting, the photograph behind you above your head, what is that? Can you, yes.
That is the Pont Neuf in Paris. And it is a painting my mother purchased in 1940, blah, 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 blah. Wow. When the UN was having a big conference in Paris, and the UN correspondents for the New York Times went there, including her then boyfriend, Abe Rosenthal, and she persuaded her boss, the bureau chief, whose name I'm sorry I've forgotten, but whose son now works there, like me, I did, to let her go along and take care of all of their needs. And he wasn't her boyfriend yet, but she got to spend time with him in Paris. And I have this wonderful picture of my mom in one of those black and white striped shirts with a beret on her head, and my dad on the Pont Neuf. And she had this over her bed. And after she died, I brought it here.
Oh, David says, great show, watching from Italy.
David, hi. David and I worked together for years. David has forgotten more about international affairs than I'm ever going to learn.
So David, get in touch. Let's have you on the show. Let's talk.
Yeah, and he moved to the Italian Riviera. What a creep.
Mukhrak, my dear friend, says, thanks for sharing your perspective. What a great conversation. Grateful to both of you.
Thank you all.
This is classic Andrew giving opinion on the opinion page. Fantastic. And just so many other great comments coming in. Andy, we'll let you get back to your Sunday. What's on tap? You said your wife is away, so what are you doing?
My wife went on a spa weekend. My son and I have been watching, we've been going through our list of a combination of classics and garbage, and also movies that you must see, whether they're good or bad or not. And so last night was Saturday Night Fever, which my son had never seen, and is a huge music person. And I got to tell you, watch that movie. It's a great movie for right now because it's from it's got its issues, but it's from a rather seemingly uncomplicated era, and the music will just get you out of your seat.
Give us a couple more movies. Give us some more on the list.
Let's see. We watched the Maltese Falcon the other night. Wow. We have gone through the entire Fast and Furious series, which I highly recommend. You can watch them with the sound off if you need to. Doesn't really matter what they're saying. We also watched all of the Underworld series, which is about vampires and werewolves. We watched a lot of an amazing program called Schitt's Creek, which everybody
a
gets.
lot of people saying good things about that. Yeah.
Oh, we also watched a great, and for your viewers, there's a documentary right now on Netflix, which I highly recommend, called The Social Dilemma. But it will ruin your day. And it was great for me because everything I've been ranting about the social media since day one turns out to be way more true than I even thought.
Norm says, you're inspiring me to remain a Times reader. And
thank you, Norman. I think the Times is incredibly important. I can spend as much time as you want finding fault with it. It's an organization of human beings. But the New York Times and the Washington Post, the LA Times is making a comeback. Yay. Whether it succeeds or not. Without these organizations, you wouldn't know anything. You wouldn't know that Donald Trump didn't pay any taxes. You wouldn't know they lied about Vietnam. You wouldn't even have read about you wouldn't even have read in your local newspaper about the publication of the theory of relativity, which had the best headline ever: "Lights Askew in the Heavens." And the subhead was, "Only 3 people alive today understand this theory." Anyway.
That's amazing. I should say that one of the shows where we produce by Merrill Brown called the News Project with Alex Leo is interviewing Norm Pearlstein, the head of the LA Times, this coming Thursday. Yeah, so everyone should follow the News Project or follow my tweets, and we'll be retweeting that. So that'll be live. Norm Pearlstein, the editor-in-chief of the LA Times, will be the guest of on the show that we produce. So it'll be very exciting. Speaking of shows we produce, right after this at 11 a.m. Eastern, everyone take a break and come back for She's on Call. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian are going to have two fabulous radiologists to talk about Breast Cancer Awareness Month and so much more, and COVID, president's situation, all of that. 11 a.m. Go to Facebook. Please follow on Twitter, YouTube. They'll be live. And it's a show that I get to executive produce with the two surgeons. So please join us then. And with that, Neil, let's say goodbye to Andy. Thank you very much, Andy. Next week, Neil Genslinger will be here.
Oh, my God. Wow, that's great.
He's a New York Times obituary writer, previously the theater critic and TV critic. And he will talk also about Rett syndrome. He's a parent who is dealing with this condition, and he's also been on the show before, but many years ago. So now we're bringing him back for the 5-year anniversary. Thanks, Andy.
Congratulations on your anniversary.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And let's have Neil come back, and we'll say goodbye, Neil. What a great start to our 5 years. You and the team have done an incredible job. You took what was just a lark on my part and made it into something real. Thousands of people watching. Everyone, please tag your friends. You know someone who would benefit from hearing that conversation. And we're back every single Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And it's such a great contribution. I'm so proud that we're doing this every Sunday, Neil, and hats off to you and the team.
Thank you very much, Sri. And again, just so people know, it is a full team that pulls the New York Times Read Along together, with Sri as the host. I'm the executive producer and guest host. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. And to take a moment, we want to also make sure people know about the Local Connection, a newsletter that Carla puts together from the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. We certainly got several pro tips from Andy today. The best of all, it's free, and you can get it at bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. Sri, I always say that it's an incredible honor and a privilege to be part of the New York Times Read Along and to be able to executive produce the show and guest host. And what an incredible community that we've built up, that you built up over years, that I was proud to join. Janine is saying thank you. Ron is recognizing the A-team. And we have several people who are very interested in next week's conversation with Neil, talking about his daughter who has Rett syndrome. I'll say, just as a connection with Neil, not just the same first name, but I actually remember listening to your show with Neil. This was about 2 years ago after I'd moved to DC. This is before I sat in the chair every week to produce. I listened to the show on my bike, cycling down to Mount Vernon one morning. And I stopped in between. I took a break in between so that I could comment and stuff, and then got back on. So it'll be great to have Neil on. He's in addition to, he was the TV critic at the time, and we talked a lot about Netflix and TV, but he's now on the obituaries desk, and I know that that's a fascination of yours. So again, Neil Genslinger will be joining us next week, October 11th. Former TV, New York Times theater and TV critic, and now an obituary writer, and we'll hear a lot about what it's like to be a parent of a child with Rett syndrome. So with that, Sri, we'll thank everyone for joining us. And again, Andy, what an incredible conversation and an incredible insights. Definitely a highlight up there with our trip to the printing plant, and with Tom Jolly couldn't have been a better start to our 5th year celebration. This is we can end with Mark's comment at the end, Sri. If you'll allow me, what a great show and what an amazing team. Glad to call all of you friends and colleagues, and we're proud to call all of you friends and colleagues as well. So with
Mark
that,
is one of the examples of someone who we didn't know the New York Times has brought us together, the love of the paper and what it does. We don't agree with everything. I mean, people have asked me this, Neil, is this sponsored by the New York Times? In the old days, it was sponsored by Facebook or anything. And we said, no, we wanted to keep this independent. We have guests who have nothing to do with the Times, but we believe in the value of print. And that's what brings us together. And these great guests, occasionally from the New York Times or former New York Times folks. But the main point is a community that comes together to talk about facts, talk about information, and not misinformation and disinformation, which is killing people. Millions of people are dying now because people are prioritizing disinformation over facts. And that's what we're celebrating here. It's not about the love of the paper alone. It's about the love of journalism and the role that it plays in the world. And we are making a stand for it every day and every single Sunday. So please join us at 8:30 a.m. Eastern and on Sunday mornings. And please do connect with Neil on Twitter at Neil Parekh, and I'm at Sri. And with that, let's say goodbye to everyone.
bye.